anyone know how to handle a lemon bus and the company won't back it?
Well, I would just say that I have encountered this, and one sort of understandable, probably recurring case in which it occurs is where an agency has been somewhat innovative and has acquired a bus that uses advanced or innovative technology, and for a number of reasons the manufacturer can't support the continued operation of the vehicle. These manufacturers may not remain in business. The technology may be quickly surpassed by later phases. There could be any number of reasons. And of course, one of our dilemmas is, in general, that bus can't be replaced with federal funding until it's 12 years old. And a client have had difficulty in dealing with that situation. My first comment would be that the standard bus acquisition contracts do provide long-term warranties. If you actually read the warranty provisions in the standard bus procurement guidelines for the body and structure of the bus, it's 12 years. And so there is a contractual liability there. I understand that you can't get blood from a stone, but there's certainly a lot of legal leverage.
We kind of do the same. We just make sure from a legal perspective that we have everything buttoned up pretty tight. And to be real honest, the few problems we have had, we've had the manufacturers step up and take care of. So we've been lucky from that standpoint.
It's been difficult to join or establish a team to really perform the required tasks to do this properly. Len is the CEO at Southwest Transit, and if he were the CEO at the New York MTA or New York City Transit, I'm sure he would be able to inspire the same kind of teamwork that he has at Southwest Transit. But not everyone who took the course and not everyone on the call is the CEO of their organization. All I can say is I think that Len has laid out a very good pattern for how this can work. And to the extent that you are looked to in your organization to help advance the asset management, the state of good repair of the assets, you can suggest that kind of process, integrated team process, be formulated. And it can also be done on portions of an organization.
It might be useful for the group to hear of some of the perspectives of some of the participants. I recall a couple of participants who were responsible for a relatively new asset management function in their organization, and these were agencies that were in the middle of fairly significant system expansion activities. And they were finding that at the executive level and at the board level, almost all of the focus was on system expansion and not very much focus addressing how do we keep what we got. Now, how do we really apply these asset management principles? That's a real frustration. It strikes me that, if nothing else, the requirements of MAP 21 are going to encourage those executives and those transit boards to take these issues seriously. But it is a real concern at several agencies where expansion has been the focus and not so much reinvestment.
What is your agency's capital asset threshold?
We use $5,000 as a rule of thumb. But again, as we start digging in some cases we've had to make some exceptions, and we'll do some grouping. Again, to start, our overall threshold is that $5,000 amount, and quite frankly, we took that really from the course. And again, as we're going through facility by facility, the rolling stock has been complete. We're finding we have to make some exceptions along the way to that limit or to that threshold.
I think Steve correctly said this is one of the issues. This question of threshold, Sometimes it's referred to as granularity, but the question of particularly on the capital program, how fine is your inventory seems to be a very difficult hurdle to get over at the beginning of the process.
I guess my key issue is, and guidance is, it's sort of your level of pain. What level of detail are you willing to support, and is it beneficial or not? So, from Len's comment, I think I inferred that there were things that were maybe less than, individual items that were less than the $5,000 limit, but collectively they might be very expensive, and I'm thinking for a lot of bus operators that might be equipment and radios and what have you, where an individual radio might not cost that much, but collectively it's a big expenditure over time. So, but in my mind, it's the issue of what are you willing to maintain in the inventory? Because if you're going to keep it current, you got to keep it current every year, and that's a lot of work. And is the asset you're tracking really worth it? And then is it sort of a material item to your bottom line? And if it is a material item, then it's worth tracking.
Another way to view this is that the granularity in the asset inventory should reflect the granularity in the decision making that's going to come from the application of the inventory. So the big decisions are going to be replacing all the radios. So tracking every individual radio for the purpose of supporting radio investment decisions may not make a lot of sense. It does make a lot of sense in terms of doing maintenance, but in terms of the capital programming function, not so much.
I think that point sort of emphasizes what Gary Hall said about the hierarchical nature of their access database at Southwest Transit, and I think we will start as we try to integrate the maintenance processes and the capital processes, and we try to start maintaining capital inventories, we're going to become much more sophisticated at the hierarchical relationships in our inventories so that we make that annual and continuous updating burden that Rick talked about tolerable, so that we can coordinate these inventories and minimize the perpetual inventory maintenance effort.
And indeed, that's really happening now with some of the enterprise asset management vendors who provide this ability to roll up the assets for certain reporting and supporting certain types of decision making.
Yeah, one of the things that I just wanted to make clear, as I mentioned, is we go through this process when we're getting into the facilities. This is where it's becoming more and more of an issue. Use restroom sinks, for example, by themselves, or you wouldn't replace the whole series of them across all of our facilities. But a category like technology, which the radios would fall in, there could be a change in technology fairly rapidly that would require us to make a wholesale change. That's where those smaller individual ones play a more importance, because the likelihood is far greater than some of these other smaller components. So that's kind of how we've been looking at it as well.
Try to say what we're doing here at MARTA, and I think Bob and them know what we're doing here, working with EAM vendors to come up with a capital improvement module that will have a decision module sitting on top of it for the executive management team. The key to it is having major players, champions at high levels that believe in it, and coming up with a good asset management plan. I mean, we actually began working toward this goal in 2007 when we got a new enterprise asset management system, and we started populating fields at that time. And as the new ideas in the industry, with the TAM kicking off and all these other things, we saw where what we already had started was going to be okay and be a good fit as we move forward to it. So it's a really ongoing process here in MARTA. Still has high priority. It does take a lot of time, but it's kind of like me coming from a maintenance background. We're moving to a life cycle of the asset, an enterprise asset, not just one section. So here at MARTA, we're all using the same system. We're all got all the inventory in the same system, graded the same way, conditioned the same way, and we're formulating our asset management plan going forward from this. And the idea is we're kind of having to do an ad hoc on with a kind of a SharePoint thing for our FY13 or 14 capital planning. But going forward, we plan to have this whole process automated, and all projects will come in through the same way, because not every project would be asset-based. But overall, everything's going to come in the same way, and the information in our enterprise asset management system will drive the backlog for state of good repair, and then it will go up to a decision-making software for the executive level that will have all of the weight, whatever the factors we choose, safety, ride quality, customer service, whatever is chosen in the strategic plan, that the executive management team can make from that point going forward.
That goes directly to his earlier question about the organizational approach. And I think the CEOs, the assistant executive directors are, by and large, at least aware of this issue, and many of them have taken it up. But I think what we just heard from Marta is that you can advocate for them and build on their awareness of the issue to create this organization-wide team approach that Len has suggested, and is pretty critical to trying to implement it in our industry, where we have been kind of fractured between capital side, maintenance side, funding, and so forth.
And that's true, but here at MARTA, down at the director level, we saw the great benefit in this, working with the groups that did the capital planning. We started working this, and we had a change of management, and the up top said, hey, we want to do something like this, and we already had something in place that, in other words, we didn't have to go back and reinvent the wheel. What we used, we were able to keep going with. So that's a good thing. If you got it in place, keep it going best you can, but you still need the champion, and you need the top-down buy-in. But it seems like it's more common now to get the top-down buy-in than it has been in times past.
What system do you have in place to ensure that deficiencies found during the maintenance inspection are maintained or repaired? We used to have what was called the INR process for inspection and repair, and it became jokingly known as the inspection and report process, because all the defects noted just got filed away in the vehicle's record, and there was not enough time in the day, manpower in the shop to accomplish all the repairs that were listed. So the only response that I can make to that is you have to approach your asset management program with integrity, and you have to make it clear that if assets are not maintained when they should be, not repaired when they should be, not replaced when they should be, the system is wasting money, because you're going to pay more to repair and replace those assets in the long run.
We have a very similar process. We don't call it an IR process, but we do have, again, involvement of our whole management leadership team through this process, where we identify through the course of going out doing field inspections, both with the vehicles as well as all the facilities. And this just isn't with the maintenance staff or the facility staff. We may have our planners, we may have even some of our bus washers, our youth workers, all involved in this process to identify, again, going back to that earlier presentation where you talked about the stain, we just can't allow that on our system. So we stay on top of that. We have in our budgets a good deal that we've put towards that type of activity to make sure that if we do see flaws on our vehicles or at our facilities, we get on top of it right away. So it is an ongoing process. It's one that we do kind of formally on a quarterly basis, but it's part of every monthly leadership team meeting. So that's kind of how we've gotten involved with that. And to date, I think it's been pretty effective of keeping us where we want to be.
Does anyone have a method for explaining how the previous capital asset management process has been expanded with the new asset management principles? I find most people still think of the asset planning as merely when equipment needs replaced, as opposed to a process of rating and maintaining the equipment. It's an interesting question, and I think it probably varies from agency to agency as to what the gaps between the current practice and what might be called a model practice would be. I think there are probably gaps at every agency.
Well, again, from the Southwest perspective, we operated, I think, like a lot of other transit agencies where we had our capital improvement plan, but basically that only identified if we were going to do a major rehab or if we were doing a replacement or expansion. It really didn't get into what we needed to do to preserve that asset or to keep it into the operating conditions that we desire. So this program is taking that CIP and expanding it tenfold.
I think there are a number of points in the asset management methodology that we described earlier and that we have set out in the course. And if you go back to course materials, you can find the authorities and variations on the methods, but they're impressively consistent from source to source. One underlying principle that I think is somewhat new is we should be at a state of good repair. Now, I understand that the backlog at some of our agencies, particularly some of the older agencies with significant rail infrastructure, makes that almost an impossible dream in some cases, at least a long time in the future. But let us not forget, in MAP 21's term, a state of good repair is the minimum practical life cycle cost way of providing the assets. If we're not maintaining our systems at a state of good repair, again, we are wasting money in the long run. So that's one difference that the new principles, I think, include. And I think a second one that's in this methodology that's I'd be interested in anyone's reaction to. I'd be interested in Len's view of how useful this has been to them as they get into the process. But the methodology has a fulcrum point in it referred to as the quality of service. Sometimes it's just referred to as the state of good repair. But that definition of what it is that you are agreeing to provide to your customers, what reliability, what consistency, what condition you are is part of your mission in asset management that you are going to provide over the long run is what makes it possible then to determine the maintenance program and the renewal program that minimizes the life cycle cost. And so articulating, and Rick went over this a few minutes ago, but articulating clearly exactly what it is that you think you can afford to deliver in terms of the quality of service and the availability, reliability, and safety of your assets is a part of this methodology that I don't think has been widely employed in U.S. transit to date.
We're a smaller organization, so some of these things are a little bit for us to control, but we'll set out with our various targets, such as our road call per mile at 32,000 to 35,000, which we've hit consistently each year. 0 missed trips, 100% of all pullouts on time, arrivals at 95% on time. And so we have a number of these targets, again, that are ongoing, measured and measured as the full team on a monthly basis. It's also something we bring back to my board or our commission. So that all fits into this asset management because these are the standards or targets that we're trying to continue to achieve.
I'm just thinking, as I'm listening to this discussion, of a discussion I've had recently with somebody from the firm I work with, CH2M's water group, who talked about these same issues at Scottish Water, which was sort of comparable to some of our larger rail agencies with huge backlogs and funding levels that were not sufficient to address those backlogs by any stretch. And just turning to the issue of, well, what's the best we can do with what we have and really focus on the quality of service we're delivering. And in doing so, realizing that there were large parts of their backlog they really could learn to live with And the real issue was getting the biggest bang for the buck with the dollars they had by maintaining the best quality service, and they were surprised at what they were able to achieve. Can I point to specific practices that they went through? I'm not really sure that I can, because it was sort of a grab bag of different practices. It's not like one specific approach or system. It's a whole range of practices to minimize cost of different types of assets and best maintenance practices and so on. It's not one comprehensive solution. It's a group of small solutions that got them there.
Are there any model or sample transit asset management plans to use as a guide? The only U.S. asset management plan that has been through multiple editions that I'm aware of is the Dallas plan for their bus and light rail fleets. And DART in Dallas, I think, would be glad to make that available. They've been doing that, I believe, annually with 5-year system-wide condition assessments for some time. Beyond that, I think we have to go overseas and in many cases outside the transit industry. So the question says transit asset management plans. Well, I suspect there's going to start to be forthcoming pretty rapidly in the next years.
You can download a copy of a guide at www.wsdot.wa.gov/transit/library.
That's the Washington State requirement, and Washington State has had a requirement in place for asset management plans for the Washington State agencies for some time. So that is a good source of, similar to Dallas, folks that have been doing something called an asset management plan.
I know when we started our project here, the RTD in Denver as well as the CTA in Chicago was very helpful and shared some of the asset management functions that they had been currently working on. I don't know if they have a full-blown plan or guide available, but I do know both those organizations were helpful to us.
How has the Transit Asset Management Plan changed the vehicle maintenance program and the facilities maintenance program?
There was some questions earlier about how do you know things are getting addressed. And there's a lot of things down on the minute level. How do you know that the concerns from found inspections are getting addressed? The KPIs is a big part of this, and I think that was mentioned in the MAP 21 portion of the presentations and all. On-time performance, equipment reliability, MDBF, and we use them, mean distance between service interruptions and things like that, customer complaints. And we publish them out on our website on a monthly basis for the public as well as internally for employees and for the board. And when you start digging into what's causing, a drop in these, most often, when they're especially the asset-based type things, there starts to be where you can trickle down to find out there is an issue with the asset. Now here at MARTA, we manage everything through one system, and I think I saw Lou Cribbs typing a while ago, RTD from Denver. They use the same type system as we do, and we've worked and met with them and talked on the issue quite often. Another point to address is the changes in asset management that we're undergoing now. How has it improved over what was in the past? And I don't know about other agencies, but a lot of in the past, people had their projects that were wish list, and if they could justify and write a good executive summary and all, they might get a project through. Whereas if you're using an enterprise asset-based approach to it with condition ratings like was mentioned, at DART done on a 5-year basis or whatever the interval is you chose, that you keep those updated, then you can rate your assets on criticality as far as it's mission critical to the service or safety critical, which would receive higher ratings when it got up to the executive management decision tool that we're implementing here. MARTA is also currently developing their plan. We got part of it put together, and we'd be willing to help anybody that wanted to contact us as well in this, because the main issue is find the best way to do it, the easiest way to do it, the way that makes sure that not the squeaky wheel gets the money, but the money is well spent where it needs to be, as has already been stated in the presentation. We do use the same system to govern rail cars, buses, non-rev vehicles, IT equipment, facilities, and it's all in one system, all done the same way, same coding structure. And to me, that's been a real big plus in this. because we're not comparing apples to oranges anymore. So everything is falling in the same categories, and when you run a report, you can group it by that. I heard, say, oh, like radios. Yeah, for a maintenance guy, he wants the radios to be an asset, but when you're able to group it at a hierarchy for a replacement, then it becomes really a big benefit as we go to the financial folks in the capital. So the direction that everybody seems to be going or wanting to go in this, it's really going to be a benefit as we go forward.
Regarding the asset number shown in the access system, if the capital threshold is $5,000, the asset number shown in access system would not be the same as the one assigned in the financial system. Is this correct? That would be the case that the financial system has one asset item that were involved with various inventory items / labor, while the maintenance or bus divisions are maintaining each single items for state of good repair purposes. So I think this question is going to the difference between a capitalization policy and threshold, which would be a dollar threshold at which an expenditure resulting in a useful life of more than a year would be capitalized and added to the balance sheets as an asset, rather than the smaller expenditures below that threshold, which would be expensed and deducted on the income sheet from the equity accounts, as opposed to the threshold that I think Len and Gary and Steve were talking about, which was the rules and guidance that they were starting to develop for what they would include in their asset management inventory.
Yeah, I think that we're talking two different things on that. It's really got nothing to do with the financial plan or trying to separate things out. As far as the finance system goes, it was just simply that. You need to find a number to be able to base things on. You just don't want to take things all the way down to a single drinking fountain or an office chair or an office table. At some point, you need to look at these items, and as Len mentioned earlier, if there's a technology change, now that $2,500 item becomes, a $175,000 item. So, there's where you got to kind of weigh. Is it an important thing to keep track of, or is it not?
I don't believe that traditionally the asset management inventories, which really have been maintenance inventories for the most part, have been very closely correlated with financial fixed asset inventories. Ideally, they would correspond with each other and be directly linked, but in my experience, very few transit systems actually have an asset-by-asset linkage between the financial ledger with the fixed asset inventory that's reconciled to asset totals on the financial statements, and the maintenance inventory that is the list of assets in service and their maintenance histories. And I think that would likely be the same for the emerging asset management inventories that are used at the capital level, as Bob and Rick discussed earlier. I'm very hopeful that the maintenance and capital inventories can be closely linked together. I think that's going to be difficult, and it's interesting that at Southwest Transit, as I heard it, they're really maintaining separate inventories. They have their enterprise asset maintenance system with vehicle histories and so forth for maintenance purposes, and a new access database for longer-term asset management purposes. But the linkage to the financial side, I think, is a more distant goal. What is the financial impact in the operating and capital budgets in implementing transit asset management?
I think we'll have a better indication once we're fully done with our plan what the annual impacts are going to be in terms of putting this together. And we really got this thing up and running, I would say, in August. So, and we're just scratching the surface. So it is going to be a fairly sizable commitment in terms of staff time once we get this thing all completed. But then, again, what I see is the real budgetary impact is once it's there, how much is it going to cost to maintain the level that we're currently meeting, and how are we going to plan for that? How will we take that out over a series of years? Again, that's what's really going to help us down the road. We don't have that information right now.
So there's really two levels of thinking about this question. One is the administration of a transit asset management program, and then the other is the cost of maintaining and replacing assets. In your last comment, Len, you were reflecting on the latter. In the long run, over the years, the promise is that the life cycle costs can be lower through an asset management program. But I think what you've said about the former, if I heard you correctly, on the administrative cost of implementing the program so far, you've done it on sweat equity, so to speak.
Yeah, that's correct in both cases. And to finish out the project, like I say, we're about maybe a quarter of the way through. So if that's the case, we're going to have anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 just of our staff time involved in putting this together. Then it's maintaining it and updating it. So there is a level of commitment, but again, to get to the latter, and that is get our hands around those assets and the cost of maintaining and replacing, this is what it's going to take to do it all in-house like we have.
The term quality of service will probably be a way of helping people understand the shift in asset management planning logic. And I believe that's true. As time goes on, I think that's going to be a critical part of the asset management discussion. We've started talking about this, and we have at least one client who's taken us up on the suggestion that this should be called a quality of service agreement, almost as if the public was contracting with a private entity to provide the assets. The agency would say, we're agreeing with our customers to provide service at a certain level of quality, and we're going to minimize the long-run life cycle cost of doing that on behalf of both riders and taxpayers. What are the barriers to funding asset management, both maintenance and renewal? Len, you may have some thoughts on that, but I think what you've said is you're preparing for that challenge in the future, and you're putting yourself in a position to be able to deal with it with knowledge in advance.
That's correct. The biggest barrier that we have, again, is keeping it a priority and making the time available. Again, doing it all internally. But again, the commitment's there from senior management, from the board. It's not something that we think is a nice thing to do. It's something we have to do in the position we're at right now. So we just have to make it a priority and put the funding forth accordingly.
As I mentioned earlier, some of the participants of the course expressed some frustration that at the executive level and the board, the focus has been on expansion and not on renewing the existing assets. All this has to begin at the top. If management is not paying attention, it's going to be a very difficult process.